welcome back. I am out snowshoeing. It's a beautiful, beautiful day. It's been cloudy, but it's got to be up in the mid to high 40s. And today I want to talk about when the shit hits the fan, and your health. If you were back away from it all, you got away from the cities, the towns, and you went back in the woods where it was more safe, and you had your family with you, do you have plans for what you're going to do if that family member becomes ill? Now, most people stock up on the basic first aid, Band-Aids, wrap, just the everyday use, because anything more than that, in the perfect world, you can get to a doctor, you can get to a hospital, or help could come to you. What if you couldn't get to where there was help, or help couldn't come to you, and if there was no form of communication, they wouldn't know you needed help? I'm going to tell you a true story. My uncle, years ago, when he was a little one, he was like 10 or 13 years old, and his parents, my grandparents, lived way up north, northern Maine, and it was winter. And they had a lot of snow that year. And they didn't live in town, folks. They lived a long ways from town, And they didn't have many neighbors. And my uncle, he became sick. And I can't remember, he's told me the story quite a few times over the years, but I can't remember what the illness was. But I know his fever, he had an extremely high fever. And my grandmother did everything she knew of to try to get that fever down. But it kept getting worse. Everything that she tried, it wasn't working, or it wasn't working as well as they had hoped it would. Now, my grandfather was a woodsman. He was in good shape. He had a team of horses, but there was so much snow that the cars couldn't go, the trucks couldn't go, the horses couldn't go. They couldn't make it into town to get the doctor to come to him. So he packed what little food he could carry with him, and with snowshoes, he headed right through the woods, because it would take too long to stick to the roads. It was a lot further going, the roads into town than it would be to cut right straight across country. So he carried some food, and he started walking cross country on snowshoes, and a lot of snow. There was a lot more snow. They got a lot more snow than we get today, folks. I'm old enough to remember a lot of those snowstorms. And what we get for snow now is nothing compared to what we used to get when I was a kid. And that was nothing compared to what my parents went through and my grandparents went through. So he started walking on snowshoes. He walked 3 days, folks, on snowshoes and what little food that he could get in his pocket, until he got to town. And he found a doctor, Well, it didn't snow. It didn't snow during those 3 days. So when the doctor followed him back, again, the same trail that my grandfather took, through the woods on a pair of snowshoes, it took them 1 day. Because they walked on the same trail, it was easier to walk. My grandfather, my grandfather had to break trail for 3 days and a lot of snow. He was in good shape. There aren't many people today in good enough shape to do that, probably. And if you're in good shape, you've got to know how to work snowshoes. You've got to know how to walk in snowshoes. It takes practice. It takes practice. So if you thought what's going to happen if you're hunkering down in your safe location and a family member gets sick, how are you going to go get help? How are you going to get them to help? Could you bring them? For those of you who have never snowshoed, and for those of you who have snowshoed, you can't just put a pair of snowshoes on and walk through the woods. It's like riding a bike. You're going to fall. It's going to be gummy. You don't walk like you would if you didn't have, just a pair of sneakers on or a pair of boots. It's like putting roller skates on for the first time. You're not going to be speedy, folks. You're not going to be able to put a pair of snowshoes on and think you're going to go running in them. Now, I've snowshoed all my life. Since I was a kid, had snowshoes about this long. And I'm pretty good at snowshoes. You know where to walk, where you should walk, where you shouldn't walk. But when there's a lot of snow on the ground, and if you're not used to the area, the woods that you're walking in, it might get you into trouble because there's a lot of stuff that's hidden underneath this snow that you can't see. There was once I was walking, and I decided to walk a different route. And we had quite a bit of snow that year. And I took one step, it was all good. So I was taking another step. Well, that other step had a small fir. And those of you who live in snow country, that under trees there's not much snow, but if we get a lot of snow, it kind of climbs up the trees, and then there's this hollow spot underneath. Well, I found that hollow spot. This leg did. So when I stepped down, that snowshoe had nothing to, once it went through that first foot of snow, it just kept right on going. So I had one leg up here that was connected to a snowshoe, and this leg here was completely buried. I swear to God, I was going to the other side of this world. And then when the snowshoe went down, it went under a tree. It slithered under a tree, so I couldn't wedge that snowshoe out, and I was trapped right there. So I said, well, it was cold that day, and cold weather gear is gummy. So I said, well, I've got to take off my outer gear. So I stripped down into I just had a t-shirt underneath the sweatshirt, and so I was getting heated. I was trying to get my foot out, and I weren't going anywhere. So I took all my outer gear off so I could reach over, because my snowshoe was back here, and my leg was back here because I had taken that step. So I had to get that snowshoe off, bring my foot around, and with my hands, I had to dig a hole so I could stand up a little bit. And I tried to pull that leg out, and I tried to pull that leg out, and I couldn't reach down through, 3.5 feet of snow to get it so I could unlatch that snowshoe from my foot. I was stuck right there, folks. I was stuck right there. Nobody knew where I was. I was out in the woods. The longer because I had to sit, I had to sit in the snow. So I was getting wet and I was getting cold and I was stuck right there. There was nothing I could do. Nothing I could do. So in that whole process, I took the snowshoe that I took off and used it as a shovel, and I dug and I dug and I dug and I dug, and my body was, from a distance you couldn't even see my body because I was bent down and the snow was coming up and I was piling it up. So I finally got to my snowshoe. In the dark, I couldn't see what I was doing. I knew the bindings well, so I figured out where the bindings were, and I undid the bindings. I got my foot out. I hauled that snowshoe out, sat in the snow, put both my snowshoes back on, and I was able to walk back out. But I was cold. I was wet. It was getting toward dark. The wind had come up. I had spent all that energy, and I was sweaty. I was hot. So when I stopped that activity, I started getting really cold. And then I had to make my way back to where I could get warmed up. Forethought, folks. I made several mistakes. I was just out for a leisurely snowshoe adventure. I didn't bring my cell phone. I didn't tell anybody where I was going. I took a new path. Getting close to dark, I took a new path. Okay, that's where that got me into trouble, because I know the original path. I knew where those trouble areas were. I could have froze to death. I could have been hypothermic. I could have, when I stepped down, I could have broken my leg. I could have twisted my knee. A lot of things could happen. So it's a good idea to plan. I learned a very valuable lesson that day. So it's a good idea to plan. Tell somebody where you're going. So if you get to a point where somebody's in trouble and you have to go get help, and it's winter, I hope you have a plan for that, folks. I hope you have a plan.